name is Laura Briggs. I'm married to Smokey Briggs. I think he left here. He moved me out here in 1999. Is he around here somewhere? He's my designated driver. He moved me to Pecos in 1999 from Lubbock so that he could take the job as the publisher for the Pecos Enterprise. And when we moved out here in 1999, Pecos wasn't much, y'all. It was a dying small town. The mom and pops were leaving. The next generation wasn't taking on these stores. You know, Walmart had come to town. Everyone's going to Odessa to shop. And somebody said it perfectly. When the economy's like that, you can't buy a job. And that's not a way to live in a small town. You know, it's hard when you can't get a job and everything's leaving. So we see what oil and gas has done for Pecos. We have a Starbucks. My kids are like, who ever thought Pecos would have a Starbucks, right? And we have a United grocery store, and we have tax money coming in to fix these buildings. And everybody who has a job has at least one job. Some of us have 2 jobs. Some of us have 3 jobs. So I am not anti-oil and gas. My dad worked for Exxon. My grandpa worked for Exxon. I love the land out here. I love to watch how gas and oil is produced. I love living in a first world country. I love hospitals and air conditioning and all the great things that we have from oil and gas. And I love living on a ranch. I love knowing where my eggs come from. I love knowing where my meat comes from. I love the Cayenosa Farms that produces all of the cantaloupe, the Pecos cantaloupe, and the onions that you buy at H-E-B. To me, it's beautiful that we have the resources to produce energy, to be first world country, and we can produce our own food and everything. So I'm not anti-oil and gas. I love Pecos. Pecos greeted us with open arms. And Bill Hubbs, I don't know how many of y'all remember him. He was a business owner here in Pecos, and he told us, well, if you wear out a pair of boots in West Texas, you'll never leave. And I guess we've worn out a pair of boots because we've been here 25 years. We have the Pecos Enterprise newspaper and the Monahans newspaper, and we love it here. So I'm going to tell you my story as a landowner. So this is going to be kind of the true crime part of today's presentation. And I can talk a long time, so I'm going to read to kind of keep me on time. To the point, since 2019, I've had 5 orphaned wells blow on my small Pecos County ranch. And wells are doing the same thing on my neighbors' ranches. And the purpose of this symposium is so that we can discuss solutions to this problem. And what I'm bringing here today is that's great. Who's going to enforce these solutions? Because based on my experience as a landowner battling oil and gas fraud on my land for over a decade, the state of Texas not only has no means to regulate or enforce produced water management in the oil field, but is adding to the problems with a paperwork-only regulation approach. Now, I'm going to really talk bad about the Railroad Commission today, but I have friends that work there. It's not really the people that are there. It's the way the whole agency is set up. And so I'm going to explain that to you, because while we're working really hard to fix the water problems, if we don't have an entity in place to regulate it, it doesn't matter. So let me tell you my true crime story. My relationship with the Railroad Commission began in 2013. We bought our little West Texas Pecos County ranch in 2008. And it's a really special ranch. It borders the Pecos River, and at that time there was still water in the river. And it borders the Imperial Reservoir, and at that time the reservoir was full and people were going out to boat. And the agricultural irrigation ditch that leaves the reservoir goes right through the middle of our ranch. And we were able to float on that water as it was headed to the fields to irrigate. But now all of that is dry. Now our property came with a lot of old oil wells. We live in the Permian Basin. We live in the oil field country. Of course, we have oil wells out there. But these were orphaned. These were way orphaned. We would get, is that me? We're good? We would get people that said they had the lease, and they would come on every 6 months, and really they just harvested all the metal and took it to the recycling plant. Nobody was monitoring these wells. Now, my dad worked for Exxon, and Exxon's pretty strict. I think the whole reason that oil and gas is still afloat in Texas is we have a lot of good oil and gas companies. I'm not knocking oil and gas companies either. There's some good ones, and they're doing it right. But when your operator leaves, they don't even have to shut the gate. They don't turn off the electric. They don't shut the flow lines. Those wells are under pressure. The Railroad Commission doesn't even come in and tell you what an H2S monitor is and tell you how to be careful. It's just abandoned. So after decades of sitting idle, and these wells were drilled back in the 80s and before, we got a call from this guy named Patrick Reagan Beeson with Aegis Fluids Management. And he said, hey, I've just obtained all the leases underneath your ranch, and we're going to be drilling 6 deep wells, and you know what? We're all going to be so rich. And I said, that's crazy. Nobody's drilling around here. But sure enough, they started bringing out these oil wells, or drilling rigs, 2 at a time. And they were drilling these wells, 10,000 feet deep, as quick as they could do it. But nothing made sense. The vendors weren't getting paid. All his money was on prepaid Visa gift cards. He didn't know how to put diesel in his truck. They were bringing busloads of old people out and taking their pictures on the tank batteries. I had camera crews out there taking pictures of my cattle by the tank batteries and the rigs. Terry Garrett, and if that name's familiar, he's fighting to get municipal water right now to that neighborhood that they just built over in Midland where they can't get water to the houses. Well, he had Garrett drilling, and he drilled 2 of these wells, and he's like, this doesn't make any sense. So he hired a private investigator. Well, it turns out that Patrick Reagan Beeson of Aegis Oil had been indicted for fraud before. His former business partners were in the federal prison, and this was another oil and gas scam in the form of a joint venture. These wells that destroyed my ranch were not drilled for production. They were drilled as a prop for the investment deal that he was doing. So we took this to the FBI. We were like, oh, we have all this evidence. We're going to get you in trouble. And the FBI laughed, and they said, oh, my gosh, honey, you just discovered oil and gas fraud. Probably half of the wells in Texas are actually drilled as some sort of investment opportunity rather than for true production. And we will never prosecute this. First of all, these are so complex. They cover investors in lots of different states. And even in Canada, this one guy in Canada took $1 million loan from Agriculture Canada and gave it to this guy. So not only did he lose his money, he owes Canada $1 million. And the investors are old. They're not going to live long enough to get through litigation. They're broke and they're embarrassed. But the SEC and the State Securities Board did indict Aegis because the joint ventures that he offered were technically qualified as investment securities. So Aegis was indicted for fraud, but this is no big deal. He got his tens of million dollars in his prepaid Visa gift cards. He rents his house, he rents his cars, he doesn't care. So basically, this is just a cease and desist order with a useless judgment that you can go file in the courthouse. He had no legal obligation to clean up the leases or the wells that he drilled. He simply walked away to spend his money and let the state of Texas clean up the mess. Now, the mineral owners on my property are Jetta and Devin, and they found out what was happening, and they took Aegis to court. And guess what? Aegis never had a valid lease. Aegis bought expired leases from, I guess, somebody who scrapped some pipe on our property. So the drilling permits, the P4, the P5s, everything that was issued by the Texas Railroad Commission was all based on lies and false information. But guess what? The Texas Railroad Commission doesn't validate any information on the permits. They just issue them. So Jetta and Devin took Aegis to court, and the wells were shut in on trespass. But the Texas Railroad Commission has their own court with their own administrative law judges. And so these outside court judgments still didn't affect the internal rulings of the Railroad Commission. In the eyes of the Railroad Commission, Aegis, the indicted trespasser, was still the operator of record. Now, meanwhile, some of you guys might know this guy's name, William Gilligan Sewell. He's over in Midland drilling rigs with Robinson Drilling right now. He was working with Aegis, and he was a vendor, and he caught on to this scam. And he saw this guy walk away with $30 million and no liabilities. So he started his own oil and gas company called 7S Oil and Gas. And he ran the same scam on the same leases after the Texas Railroad Commission also permitted him to be the new operator. The Texas Railroad Commission would permit a billy goat to operate these old leases. I swear they would. Because it takes these wells that should be on the plugging list and it puts them in seemingly legitimate operations. It keeps the well bores open and creates new well bores for future potential money-making production for the state. It launders the leases. It hides the state liabilities. Fraud benefits the state. And old wells were not a problem. They could stack up. They only became a problem when produced water started pressuring up and they started failing. I couldn't get any media attention until the crane blowout. Now, under 7S Oil and Gas, things got ridiculous. The pits that they dug when they drilled, they left those open. They used those pits for 2 years to dump produced water that they brought in from other leases. They used my ranch as a dump. They would dig pits and just dump trash. They brought the investors out on tour buses, and they would pressure up a well, and then they would open the well, and I put a picture in the packet. And the investors were like, oh my goodness, it's Spindletop, let me go get my checkbook. And they're just writing these guys checks. They would put old pump jacks at the old legacy wells and claim production. There's no electricity, there's no flow lines, the pump jack's not connected. I don't work in the oil field and I can tell there's no production there, but that's what they needed to do to keep their permits. So I have written hundreds of letters to the Texas Railroad Commission, the General Land Office, who manages the mineral classified leases, where there's really no surface owners to manage the surface. And we would have inspectors come out and they would write them something like their sign's not in the right place. I'm running quick on time, but I want to tell you the biggest scam they did is they bought some rigs and they set them up like they drilled. They bought fuel from the Allsup's gas station and brought them up and lit them up. So if you drove by, you think they're drilling for oil, but they're not. There's no hole in the ground at all. But they drilled 2 pits, like you have a pit when you do the oil. They would produce somebody else's well, fast line it through that black poly pipe, put it in the pits, bring a water truck, vacuum out the oil, and take it to another lease. They did it for 9 months, and we couldn't get them to stop because the Railroad Commission doesn't do enforcement. They only issue permits. So before 7S was also indicted for fraud, they partnered with a company called Arch Oil. Arch Oil and Gas is kind of a big deal. They're part of a company called Fifth Partners or Fifth Natural Resources. And together, they amassed about 150 leases, not wells, leases, across 22 counties in Texas. So the bad operators that were on my land just got permitted across 22 counties in Texas. Now, after 7S got indicted for fraud and lost their P5, 7S and Arch went to court in Dallas County. I don't know how I found this litigation. I was learning to use Pacer and I found it. I was like, oh my goodness, their court testimony is all right here. We wouldn't have to do a deposition or anything. It explains the fraud. It explains how they're connected. It has all their leases. And everywhere in this, testimony, court testimony, we're 50-50 partners. We're 50-50 partners. We own the assets 50-50. Well, me and my husband own things 50-50. If you're in a partnership with another business, you own things 50-50. You're both liable. Well, I found some case law. Sometimes Google just gives you stuff. And this case law, I put it in your packet that I left out. It explains that if you're partners, you can both lose your P5 and you're both on the hook for your plugging liabilities. So my husband gave me the big checkbook and I hired a lawyer out of Houston called Stephen Lord was his name. He's moved to another law firm and I gave this to him and I'm like, what do you think? Do you think we could give this to the Railroad Commission and say, listen, you don't even have to do the legal work. It's already in court in Dallas. You don't have to do a deposition. It's already established and here's your case law. Let's make these operators do the right thing and plug all of these wells that they're using for fraud. And they said, well, we don't think they have a beneficial interest. We have a working interest. They have a working interest, and so we just don't think we're going to pursue it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you guys, I have called every law enforcement agency. I've called the TCEQ. I found litigation that will help, and you guys won't even do your job. So he said, I do think you have a good case here. You can do two things. You can either pony up and hire an attorney that's on a first name basis with the attorneys that work in the Railroad Commission, and maybe you can get through that way. Or we can take this to court in Travis County, and you can sue the Railroad Commission and try to make them do their job. But this is going to have to happen in Travis County, and this is going to cost you a minimum of $25,000. And if you win, which you might, the Railroad Commission will appeal, and you'll have to do it again. And I had to fold my cards. I can't play that game of poker. Now, after 7S and Arch parted ways, these leases started going to other shady operators. Some of us landowners were out there, and we were watching the signs going, who's going to be the next scumbag to take these wells? Jetta is the mineral owner, and they were stealing so much oil that I kept complaining to Jetta. And finally, Jetta was like, you know what, lady? We'll come out. And they would come out, and we went to every single well, and they got out of the truck, and they looked at it, and they were like, holy shit, lady, have you called the Railroad Commission? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been calling them for 10 years. And they're like, well, let me tell you what's wrong. This well is wide open. There's nothing to shut it off. It's pressured up. One of them is fixed with a hard hat full of concrete. They just stuck it on top where it's leaking. One of them is just open. You can sit and drop rocks down it and hear a rock drop 10,000 feet. And the Railroad Commission doesn't come out because there's no operator. And now we have over 10,000 orphaned wells on the list officially. But how many are wrapped up in these seemingly, useless leases? So no other enforcement agency will touch theft, contamination, or trespass. And that's why you guys are seeing right now that we have a task force that's just been formed in the state of Texas to help combat the theft that is happening at these tank batteries where people are stealing oil. Over 40% of operators are saying that they're having oil stolen. And the government's not going to help you there. I'm sorry, you're going to have to do your own security. I don't even know. It seems like a money laundering operation to me because the government's not going to come out and stop theft. And the Railroad Commission may issue fines. And so this is what I say about that. Punishable by a fine means it's legal for a price. A bad operator is going to let those fines go, and they're just going to walk away. And even a good operator might make a choice to pay the fine instead. I know I've been places and I'm like, I'm going to get a parking ticket, but I'm just going to pay it because, I have to get to the hospital or something. So that's how fines work. No one has ever gone to jail or been criminally prosecuted for bad oil and gas operations. So how is the Railroad Commission going to manage produced water ethically? Literally, AI could do the same job that they do for the price of a couple of computers. We need a regulatory agency with a don't mess with Texas attitude. We can't outlaw fraud. People are going to make bad decisions with their money. But these scam operators are real people with real money. They walked away with tens of millions of dollars, left tens of millions of dollars in liability for the state, and ruined our land and our water that you guys are trying to clean up. If an agency enforced its rules, these scammers could still scam, but they would have to plug to play. That's fine. Go get your investment money. Come out here and play landman, but you're going to plug some wells to do it. Now, the Railroad Commission tells me that they're doing a great job. They are exceeding the goals that they are set with. Someone should tell them that their bosses aren't giving them high enough goals. So who's the boss of the Railroad Commission? It's the legislature. They have 181 bosses. No functioning company operates like this. The blessing of oil and gas brings in so much money to the elected legislature, and they dole it out. And they're drunk on that money, and they need that money to buy votes, and they have all their constituents saying, well, we need roads, we need schools, we need teacher retirements. We want to be the banana pudding capital of Texas. We need rainbow crosswalks. We need, they're begging the government to govern every part of our world, and we're leaving the goose that's laying the golden egg for us. We're not taking care of it. So we need to contact our legislatures, and the people need to start demanding water reform and for the Railroad Commission to actually regulate oil and gas. I'm going to mention really quick Virginia Palacios. She's right there. I put a page in your packet from Commission Shift. When I started working on this, I was alone, and I'm like, I'm just not going to be quiet because I know this is wrong. And so I've met my neighbors. I met Hawk and Sarah on these blowouts, and I know a lot of y'all, Robin have listened to me complain about these operators. we're trying to get at them from any angle. You know, they've got to have a chink in their armor. So follow commission shift. They're really good. They're very polite. They're always at the railroad commission meeting. I'm going to share one more thing because I have 4 minutes left. I've had a lot of well blowouts, and I don't have a lot of land. You know, I don't have room to, you know, host the damage that this is doing. The last well blowout in my house was in May. It was right behind my home. It had leaked last year, and Hawk was able to come out and fix it. And you know, you can have a leaking orphaned well and call it in, and they're like, yeah, we have 10,000. So you call me when it looks like a fire hydrant, you know. And so, you know, in May, it looked like a fire hydrant, and I called them. They let that well flow into an unlined earthen pit for about 4 weeks while they were waiting to get the money to hire a vendor to come plug it. I'm like, does the state of Texas not have a credit card? Come on, y'all. So they messed up and they cemented in the string, and then they had to have a fishing truck out there. And then they left on a Friday night. And I'm really nice to these people. This is not their fault. I bring them watermelon, I bring them cookies, I bring them my phone number. These are the people in our neighborhood. I want to get along with these people. And I went to go get a cooler that had left out there, and the well had blown again deeper. And they had to have known because I went out there 45 minutes after they left. And the well had filled the pits. It was going down a pipeline. It was going down both ranch roads. So it's a 911 call to the Railroad Commission. I just email my guy. I kind of, you know, when you get that contact and you're like, yeah, I'm not going through the channels anymore. I've got Jeffrey Morgan, you know, and, you know, they had trucks 24/7 for 3 days hauling this produced water out. It took them another 4 months to plug it. Sarah did an open records request. We got halfway through the plug. They've already spent $225,000 on this stuff. No one from the state's testing their water, but I do get media and universities out. The University of North Texas came out and got a water sample out of this. It was so radioactive and so salty that they didn't have the equipment at the university to test this water that was coming out behind my house. They had to send it to an independent lab. And they're doing a documentary on that this is going to publish in March. So, you know, orphan leases aren't managed by anyone. The wells aren't safe. The state's dropping the ball. I think it's set up where they go, well, they had a permit, but no one's in charge of this. It's a disgrace for Texas. Some of the landowners here, commission shift, they're really good at going to Austin and really staying in their face. And that doesn't work for me. I have to be here. I have the animals at the farm. We have the businesses. I've got kids. So what I took to was social media because I love my Facebook. I live out on a ranch. It can get lonely, but I have friends in Balmaray and I have friends in Colorado. And I'd be like, hey, here's a picture of my pig, or, you know, hey, this is going on. And I started posting about the well stuff. And I kind of felt like I was beating my friends up because they've all heard me complain about this for a decade. They're like, oh, here comes Laura and her leaking well story. So I started my own Facebook page called Leaking Well, and I just started documenting what was happening, and I started getting people that weren't in my friends list interested, and my kids talked me into a TikTok, and I don't know what y'all think about TikTok. You know, during COVID, it was a friend, you know, people were doing silly dances, but you know, it goes to your algorithms. I ranch, and so they're like, here's a fun way to fix your gate, or, you know, here's how we raise our pigs, or here's a nice way to make bread. And so I started just posting this leaking well stuff on TikTok, and I've gotten tens of thousands of views of people that maybe don't watch the media and maybe don't watch, you know, the Railroad Commission meetings, and they'll interact with you. Some of these people are stupid. You know, you've got to be patient and put God in your heart and use this as an educational, because they're like, why are you calling the Railroad Commission? This is oil and gas. And I'm like, I know, right? It should be called something else besides the Railroad Commission. They don't do choo-choo trains at all. They do oil and gas. And so, but you just take that as a learning, or they work for the industry and they're so incensed that you would post this. They would say, well, you know, we work for Chevron, we would never do that. And I'm like, no, Chevron would never let you do that, but I promise you the state will let you do whatever. Anyway, that's my little spiel. That's where I come from. I want it done right. I'm proud of this state. I love this state, and I want it done right. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, Virginia.
You said you think the state benefits from fraud, but I didn't understand how you
So the guy that started on me started off with a few leases doing his fraud. But if you just hit oil and gas fraud, Google's going to give you page after page after page, and AI is going to tell you how to avoid investing in it. These wells that they have used in these frauds grew from just the ones on my ranch, and then they joined with these other companies, and now we're talking about 150 leases. How many wells? One of the companies that went down from this fraud is called Maverick Energy Group. Maverick Energy Group is owned by John McCabe. If you look up John McCabe's address for his business, it's the Home Depot in Florida. This is 238 wells in Frio County. And if you follow that down, it goes to Jim Wright, who's one of our railroad commissioners. And that's when I realized, oh, it's a big club, and we're not in it. But I've watched those wells trickle down into, now they're on the plugging list. So they were used in this fraud in Frio County, and just the last few months, Maverick Energy Group is losing their P5, and all these wells are going to show up on the plugging list. And I actually made a friend on TikTok who lives where one of these wells are, and it went to leak. The Railroad Commission wouldn't come out. They asked Maverick Energy Group to come out. Maverick Energy Group came out and put a bunch of hay bales around the well and said that hay should soak up whatever's coming out of the well. You're good. So lots of rabbit holes when you start following these bad operators. And they should just be penalized. I mean, that's all I'm asking. Just penalize the criminal activity. Thank you, guys.